You're listening to the Talking Headways podcast network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Calvin Thigpen of Toole Design and Ysabel Hoogeveen of Upway to discuss the new report entitled Refurbished E-bikes and Affordable Transportation Solutions for Cities and Consumers, which about costs for used e-bikes and what can help the industry grow. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super amazing and kind Patreon supporters. We appreciate you all keeping this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire going. To join this merry band of subway crayonistas and city smarties, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note sent with a cool train station stamp. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scars. And if you want to just give a single dollar a month, you'll be able to get the podcast with 0 outside ads or podcast recommendations in Patreon. We'll leave information in the show notes about how to do it and how to get it into your podcatcher. We've also recently put up some bonus material and have weekly free posts from our newsletter intro, so check it out if you haven't already. And speaking of scarves, it's still winter, so get your heavyweight bus or bike scarves. You definitely need one for you, your friends, your colleagues, and for the anti-bus activists you just want to frustrate. If you want to get one of the bus or bike scarves or the lightweight bike scarf for hot climates, visit theoverheadwire.com or support us on Patreon. There are many other ways to support the show, including buying books from the bookshop site, either the books from the authors we interview, or any book you like. bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. And find our Cars Are Cholesterol merch at bit.ly/carsarecholesterol. And for anything else, including the Town Planning and Practice audiobook that plays like a podcast, visit theoverheadwire.com. You can also get that podcast from Libby at your public library. And finally, definitely sign up for the now 20-year-old daily newsletter at theoverheadwire.com, established in 2006, and our over 100,000 item link archive tagged by topic and city. We'll leave a YouTube explainer video in the show notes for that one as well. Or you can just keep listening and enjoying the show. We appreciate that too. You can find us mostly on Blue Sky and Mastodon, sometimes on Threads, Instagram, Flickr, YouTube, Substack, and LinkedIn if you want to connect, usually at the Overhead Wire, but with Flickr, it's called Transit Nerds. We've got some great stuff coming up in our 13th year of the podcast, so keep on listening for announcements. But for now, just enjoy the show. Hey everybody, I decided to move this part of my thank yous up from the post credits to right here, smack dab at the start, because I do want to recognize the folks who are Dallas tier or higher Patreon supporters. It really helps us out, and we super appreciate it. When I get new supporters, I'll update this section, so I hope that happens often. So first names only, but big thanks to Andrew, Ben, Derek, Gabriel, Glenn, Greg, James, Jeremy, Jim, Joseph, Catherine, Mal, Marcus, Matthew, Mike, Nicholas, Abraham, Oliver, Steve, Abby, Ed, Matthew, Sylvia, and recently added Andrew A. All right, thank you all very much. Let's get to the show. Well, Calvin Thigpen and Ysabel Hoogeveen, welcome to the Talking Headways podcast.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? And Calvin, you were here before, so we'll start with Ysabel.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. So quick about me. I'm Ysabel, born and raised in Amsterdam, a city with a lot of bikes, especially like even more than people. So basically you learn there how to ride before to drive. Started my career at Uber, also a bit in the micromobility space, and then moved to Upway almost more than 4 years ago right now. And I started to helping grow the business there, first in the Benelux from a marketing perspective, and then right now based in the US, based in the East Coast in New York.
Yeah. So maybe just to give a quick update from when we last had a chance to chat. When we last spoke, I was at Lime, the shared micromobility company. I just joined, though, 2 months ago, Toole Design Group. So very new there, very excited to be here. I'm taking the reins of a really strong sort of industry-leading new mobility practice, which was built over a decade plus by Adrian Whitty and Malia Schilling. And so, yeah, I'm transitioning from being inside the shared micromobility industry itself to now helping advise communities across the country on docked bike share, shared micromobility, but also getting to think about some new things like personally owned e-bikes, which is where I got to work with Ysabel and Upway, but also things like microtransit and neighborhood electric vehicles and mobility hubs. So getting to branch out a bit, which is exciting. So yeah, I'll stop there, but that's my new update since we last talked.
Awesome. Well, it's a very exciting time, especially along those lines. Ysabel, you talked about growing up in the Netherlands, but I'm wondering like how riding bikes to becoming an advocate, or at least, thinking about bikes from the planning and transportation perspective specifically.
Yeah, good question. So I think growing up in the Netherlands and specifically in Amsterdam, I think I learned kind of how bikes can give you kind of a freedom. I have never been in ownership of a car, and also kind of I think the main thing when moving to the US is that one of the first purchases that I did, like regardless looking at my home purchases, was having a bike, because having a bike brings you from A to B in a super fast way. And also it gives you kind of an emotional type of freedom. Like there's no car queuing, there's not a lot of cost. So I think for me, it's kind of common sense that everyone kind of in the world should be able to have a bike to their home to allow it. And that's also why I still enjoy working at Upway, because basically our mission is to get more people access to accessible bikes. So that's kind of a bit of my background. And I think it's a bit, again, like a bit of an emotional feeling that, it brings me from A to B in a super fast way. It gives me a lot of freedom, and it also gives me a lot of joy.
And Calvin, we talked about this a little bit before, but I'm curious about your journey as well, because at some point during school, you learned that, you can be a transportation planner, an urban planner, or something along those lines. And it's not something that generally that they tell you can do in school.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of easy for me now to look back and like pinpoint some points as a kid where it's like, oh, okay, maybe this does make sense that I'm here now. Like in middle school, for example, I was really into technology. So like I was in middle school when the Prius came out and the Honda Insight, if you remember those like early hybrid vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So I've always been very interested in technology. Then I went to UC Davis, and if you've heard of Davis or been to Davis, it's a bike mecca. And, it really transformed my relationship with bicycling. I didn't bike a lot outside of like when I was a pretty young kid. And I ended up sticking around. I got my undergrad and my graduate degrees at UC Davis. And I mean, my dissertation was really about that experience, about like, it was quantitative. I did surveys. I did the whole 9 yards. It was robust, but really about like how experiences with bicycling affect people's sort of attitudes, skills, abilities for life. And so I think, combining those two, I've always really appreciated how transportation technologies affect sustainability, how they get people where they need to go. And I'm always really excited by new solutions that help people get out of cars and find sort of two-wheeled or other sustainable transportation options.
It's interesting. All three of us grew up in places where you could bike. You went to Davis, so that counts, right? Like in my neighborhood in Houston, a neighborhood called Kingwood, it was built in the 1970s, but they built a series of greenbelts throughout the whole neighborhood. And there's probably 75,000 people there, and 70 to 80 miles of greenbelt trails where you can get from anywhere in the subdivision to the other one without crossing a major road. There's underpasses underneath. And so it was funny. I'll have a podcast coming out about this soon, but a friend of mine, Steve Ants, who works at Streets Blog Chicago, he lived there too for a little while when he was a kid. And when he moved to Illinois, he felt stunted. He felt like he couldn't go places, because when we were kids, we'd ride our bikes to the grocery store, to the baseball card shop to get a smoothie or whatever it was. And then when he moved away, he couldn't anymore. And then later on, he found out that, it followed the Dutch planning norms of layered destinations and things like that. So it's interesting to have the three of us in the space talking about this, especially when we all grew up in places, or at least lived in places where the bike was more important than a vehicle in some senses. So I appreciate that a lot. Ysabel, I'm wondering how Upway got started as a business, because this is new to me. It is in the report. It's not as well known as maybe some other organizations or companies that might be doing similar things or something along those lines.
Yeah, totally. So maybe a bit of background about Upway. So Upway was founded in 2021 by our co-founders, Toussaint and Stéphane, in Paris, in France. So it's a European company. And then they scaled quite rapidly throughout Europe and also in the US. So basically what we're doing in the US, we're trying to build the leading platform when it comes to certified pre-owned bikes. So basically, I always give the example. If you think about Carvana, did for cars, is bringing kind of structure to the used market. It's exactly the same that we're doing for e-bikes. So what we do in-house, it's super simple. We buy used e-bikes, then we refurbish them in-house, and then we resell them online and in person, fully certified. So that means throughout the whole US, you can either come shop online, or you can come in any point of our locations on the West Coast and East Coast, come buy it in person. So then I think one of the main question that might come is like, hey, Ysabel, like where does these bikes come from? So we source the e-bikes from different types of sources. One of them is consumers. So you, other listeners, can sell their e-bike to Upway, basically also how you can sell your car to Carvana. Secondly, we buy from rental and leasing companies, so in bigger kind of overstock batches. And we also have a network with retailers. Then as a next step, as soon as we have those e-bikes in-house, we refurbish them in our up centers. So up centers are our kind of centralized hubs where we have our in-house mechanics, where we refurbish every bike. And then again, like we deliver them to the customers at home, or you can come pick up in person. And kind of at the core of the business, like in general, we care a lot about affordability because we believe that affordability helps e-bike adoption, reliability, and also, of course, also trust. Because in the end, like we see also that people might be a bit hesitant when it comes to refurbished products. So that's why we do a lot of like checkpoints. We have a 50-point inspection program to make sure we inspect everything from the bike. But that's a bit about Upway.
I'm curious, like, what does the e-bike market currently look like? Because I know that here in the United States, it's starting to pick up a little bit more than it was maybe 5-10 years ago, but it still seems like it's a little bit behind European market, which makes sense. But I'm curious, like, what the market's like. And, you know, when you're getting these bikes, like you mentioned, who is selling them? Where are you getting them from? Like here in the San Francisco specifically, I know, Calvin, you've seen this all the time too, is like we've seen a ton of delivery workers taking e-bikes, and a lot of them will rent them from other places, or they're e-motos. You know, there's the difference between the two. So maybe first I'll just ask, like, what's the market look like?
Yeah, totally. So I think when it comes to the market, like there's definitely a bigger difference between the European market and the US market. Like indeed, we're slightly lagging behind compared to Germany, but still like a lot of e-bikes and new e-bikes are in circulation, especially when it comes to like after the COVID period, a lot of manufacturers have been producing still a lot of new products. That's why there was a lot of overstock into the market, which is being resold to others. So there are enough like e-bikes in circulation. Of course, delivery workers are using them, but still, when you look at California, one of our biggest markets currently, like e-bike adoption starts to really uptick. And yes, if we, for example, take, I don't know, maybe an example like Germany, like if e-bikes in the US were as popular in Germany today, we're looking at the 30 billion market in annual sales for e-bikes alone. So yeah, I think like, for example, we look always a lot at Upway, also at the Germany market, because if we see how that market is kind of trending upwards, this is also kind of the trajectory that the US should follow.
I'm also curious about like who needs them versus who can actually afford them. There's a price level that you can get e-bikes versus a regular bike. And so there's obviously folks who have multiple e-bikes, or they can afford to have an e-bike. The people in my neighborhood, they're usually, putting their kids in the box and then riding down the street. But I'm curious about that too, is like who needs them at the moment and who can actually afford them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know 100% the answer on that, but I think one good sign lately, what we see in the market, is that a lot of rebate programs starting to increase in certain states. If you think, for example, like the California rebate, Minnesota rebate, there are a lot of states that's starting to invest them. I think the bigger question is like, hey, I think in general, we should expand eligibility of people that can actually own an e-bike. And that's where potentially refurbished e-bike could be an option to get more kind of adoption per dollar spent. Like a rebate voucher can go up to $115 per e-bike off. So I think when it comes to the people that need them versus the people that can afford them, and especially I think it's a hot topic right now with also the rising gas prices, is that hopefully we hope to see a trend that people are kind of getting away from car ownership and moving to an e-bike ownership. And I think there, like we just did a research and we see that the annual cost of owning a car is over $15,000, whereas an e-bike costs you just a bit more than $1,000 per year. So I think when it comes to need versus own, I don't have 100% the answer on it. But I think like leasing, rebate vouchers, I think like all these types of subsidies, specifically from a state level, will help us allow to reach also people that really need it when it comes to delivery workers, maybe the low income families. Like these are types of tactics that we should implement to increase the e-bike adoption.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in really quickly. I mean, I think to your point, Jeff, like a wealthier family has the purchasing power to buy a $5,000 e-bike, like probably not an issue for them, right? And so I think in some ways, rightly so, a lot of the e-bike rebate programs have really shifted their focus to put some or all of their money towards just income qualified recipients. So making sure those people can afford a high quality e-bike. And I think one thing that maybe is missing is the people who are just above that threshold. And I think that's potentially where services like Upway can come in is if Upway offers, 30, 40, 50, 60% or more discounts, that makes it much more reasonable for you to buy a bike that's actually going to last you a long time. It's going to serve all of your needs, be it, school commute, groceries, etc. And so I do think there is a little bit with the evolution of the e-bike rebate programs. I think there's a little bit of a sort of a missing middle that I think Upway and other similar services and sort of affordability efforts can help plug that hole a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just saw a piece several days ago, and I'll have it in the best of newsletter tomorrow, is an article by the Urban Institute talking about basically what people who are economically stable, like in the United States. And they're saying like 49% of people don't have the economic security in terms of, being able to save for retirement or those extra things, going on vacations and all those other things. They might be able to be living and surviving, but they're not necessarily thriving. And so Ysabel's point is really important about the $15,000 a year that it takes to maintain a car in addition to buying and owning it. And so the e-bike might be actually a part of that equation in terms of making sure that people can get to that next level, which actually in the report, they say like people are just within like 12% of actually being of that stability, like 43% or something along those lines of those folks. So what's interesting about that is that like with the proper value exchange through maybe getting rid of a car and buying an e-bike, you might actually be able to get to those goals and be a little bit more financially stable. But I'm also curious, like, how does an e-bike specifically like compare in cost to like a refurbished bike? Because you are looking at refurbished bikes. The e-bikes are being sold, like Calvin said, they can be kind of expensive, and they do have the rebate programs that we were just talking about. But like, what's the difference between like, say, buying a used bike or buying a new one?
Yeah, I think so. To your point about the difference on car ownership, like first of all, I totally agree. Like despite like having the cost when it comes to fuel, depreciation, parking, insurance, financing, maintenance, taxes and fees, like potential repairs, like it goes up like a lot. When you think about like kind of the cost of owning an e-bike and kind of a bike acquisition, and not talking about new versus used, we're only talking about like, again, like the acquisition, then maybe a helmet, a lock, maybe some insurance for theft. That would be always helpful. And then a little bit of maintenance and charging. And it will cost you less than 1.5K. When we only talk about, let's say, the average prices that we have at Upway, so when we think about like all the certified pre-owned e-bikes that exist right now, the average price is around 1.9K, so $1,900 for a refurbished certified e-bike.
Is there insurance needed as well? Like for...
No, that's up to the customer.
Okay.
And one of the things we did in the report is looked at the sort of depreciation, or put another way, like how much can you expect to get off of the sticker price for an e-bike? And after the first year where there's a big decline, it sort of tapers off. And after about 2 years, you can expect an average discount of about 45%, give or take, compared to buying essentially the same bike brand new.
Which may or may not be much more of a discount than, say, like the rebates provide.
Yeah, and that's one of the comparisons we made in the report, which was, was referencing some work done by John MacArthur up at Portland State, Cameron Bennett and Chris Cherry, some of their colleagues, where they looked at all the different e-bike rebates of programs across the country, and sort of the average rebate program at the time of their research a few years ago was around $200 or $600 off. And the price of an average e-bike, I mean, as you said, Ysabel, is about, like, again, new e-bike is actually north of $2,000. It's probably more like $2,600 or so. And so $200 to $600 off that gets you close to $2,000. But then the discount on Upway is like 2 to 6 times bigger than that. It's more like almost $1,200 off of your sort of typical e-bike. So again, I think what's exciting to me about Upway is that it has the potential to get like a very high quality e-bike in the hands of everyday people, everyday Americans, as opposed to maybe trying, doing what you can to get like the very basic entry level e-bike, which doesn't last as long, might need more maintenance, and just, it's not going to be as enjoyable of a ride. Whereas, some of the higher quality ones will really last a long time and be very safe, in addition to being much more affordable.
What is the difference in quality in terms of like a good e-bike? I'm going to admit here something on the show specifically that I've never actually ridden an e-bike.
You should, Jeff.
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
know.
gosh.
I know.
Oh my God.
Well, I live in San Francisco. I can walk everywhere. I can take Muni.
You haven't even taken bay wheels?
Nope. I
Oh.
have one up the street. But I never needed it. I can walk everywhere. I can take Muni. I hadn't taken a scooter before too, but I was in a conference in DC for something and I decided to take one. So I ended up doing it for, I think it was TRB actually a number of years ago, before the pandemic, or
Okay.
at least 2020 maybe.
Yeah.
So what are some of the concerns about riding an e-bike or buying an e-bike?
Yeah, maybe I can start and feel free to jump in, Colvin. But I think the most important part, and that's also why we work together with Colvin, is just talking about like reliability of certified or refurbished products. And I think the main question that customers might have is like, how reliable is it if you refurbish like an e-bike? And I think like when it comes to the components, like we cover like everything, like we cover like 15 points. Again, what I highlighted is that we do before an e-bike comes in and goes out, we do a 15-point inspection. So it's a list where we go over mechanical parts, but also like the battery and so on, to make sure that the value of the e-bike is still correct. And I think like based on the data and the research that we have done is that the reliability of a new e-bike versus a pre-owned e-bike is just a 1% less. So the reason why we could do this report, we both have new e-bikes at Upway, but also pre-owned e-bikes. And we see that, again, the reliability is basically at par as new e-bikes. Just because we do like a super good inspection, we have high maintenance practice, we have in-house mechanics that go all over the e-bikes, including, I think, the main component, which is the battery and the motor, because that basically saves you on an e-bike. And like this data report that is done both like kind of in-house and with external data shows that the reliability of it is just at par, and it costs you like hundreds less.
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean to scare anybody off the e-bikes. I think sometimes with, lower cost e-bike alternatives, in order to achieve that affordability price point, you have to make decisions. You have to choose components like, are you going to use a mechanical disc brake or a hydraulic disc brake? Are you going to use a quick release skewer or a through axle? There are some trade-offs that you have to make in order to manufacture something that's at an affordable price point new. And then there's other things like battery range and, motor, quality and things like that you can certainly start to step up and up and up. And so I think those are some of the trade-offs that I was sort of alluding to, is like, if you're able to afford a higher quality e-bike, it's going to have hydraulic disc brakes. It's going to have a through axle. It's just going to be a safer, more stable ride for you and require less maintenance over time for you as the end user. And so it's, I have two e-bikes. One was our first one, and so it's the more affordable one. We were dipping our toes in, and then we got a higher price, higher quality one. They're both running just great, but we've had to do more maintenance on the earlier, more affordable one than the other. So it's more trade-offs like that than like true safety.
What are the concerns about batteries? I know that that's a discussion that's kind of taken on a life of its own too.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to batteries, it's totally true that, especially also in the news, like we see it here a lot in New York as well, like battery safety. There are some headlines about like fire in apartment buildings and so on. I think one thing that is kind of rest assured is that the only electronical components that we touch on an e-bike is the battery, motor, and some other small components like lights and so on. But when it comes to batteries, we only work with the high manufacturer companies such as Bosch, Shimano, that are already existing for years and years in the market, and that only have shown proven success where there hasn't been any issue. So these are also, and that's why we have kind of a curated brand list, only those brands that have those batteries, that we only sell those.
Yeah, and that wasn't something we touched on in the report all that much, this topic of battery safety. But I think, one of the themes and one of the things that I'm excited about with Upway and other sort of professionalized refurbished e-bike marketplaces is, not only are you thinking about affordability and reliability, and that matters, of course, for consumers, but cities care about that too. But with this sort of battery safety piece, it's also making sure you're getting affordable but safe bikes in the hands of people who might be, say, a delivery worker or whoever, and making sure that there's not unsafe batteries being charged, in bodega, in New York City, in bodega basements or in a apartment complex, because there have been, unfortunately, a number of sort of high profile tragic battery fires, and so I think this is really like a lower profile benefit of Upway, that it sells lab certified and lab tested e-bikes. But it's actually, even though it's low profile, I think it's one of the bigger benefits of the service.
Yeah, totally. I think in addition to that, I think like overall it's a battery quality problem, not an e-bike problem in general. I think like most of the accidents that indeed we probably all have seen in the news are linked to low quality and uncertified batteries. And I think like here just the solution should be like probably like standardization and control, because I totally agree as well that like the safety in general might slow down the bike adoption or e-bike adoption. But I think how it is, it's like a quality problem, not like the e-bike or bike problem in general.
Yeah, e-bikes get the blame for things that they maybe shouldn't. Maybe cars should specifically a lot of times. And so it's funny how that discussion pops off. I'm also wondering, like, one of my concerns if I was ever to get an e-bike is where to park it. At my house, I don't have a garage. I live in an old San Francisco house. I put my regular bike in the utility room, but an e-bike is bigger and it won't fit in there. And also I have some steps that I would have to bring it down, right? So they're pretty heavy vehicles generally because of the batteries. I'm curious, like, where people usually put them, or like if storage is one of those concerns that people have when they're thinking about purchasing one.
Yeah, so maybe I can start. Calvin, feel free to jump in quickly. I think in general, and I experience even self, like once I'm on a bike, like in LA, I definitely understand, like I think on macro level, when it comes to safety, but also like bike storage safety, things needs to change. I think like it comes a bit hand in hand. Like I think in general, there needs to be more places which have like secure bike parking, but also more bike lanes. So what I see right now, I think a lot of states are investing in bike parking, but under investing kind of storage. I think in general, we need to push more for like locked bike hubs. Maybe also in the Netherlands, we have a lot of like indoor parking in buildings. So for example, at all biggest like metro and train station, like we have indoor parkings as well as covered stations. I think in New York, I see also more and more these types of pins. I think a lot of like smaller companies are popping up on like bike storage, bike park safety hubs. So in general, I think where they storage, it's like either in buildings or outside. But I do agree as well that I think like states right now, they underinvest in storage.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, on an individual case by case basis is going to differ a lot. I know someone I've been talking to who really wants an e-bike, but's in your same situation, Jeff, where there's no garage, there's no place to put it. They'd have to put it like in the courtyard or something like that. So yeah, I think definitely agree. There's a strong need for more secure long-term parking. I think, more bike rooms in large, especially like larger apartment complexes or commercial buildings. I think San Francisco was trialing some new sort of covered long-term bike parking. I would love to see that throughout the city, as long as it was weatherproof and you weren't going to get rained on. And then the other thing that, pops into my mind is, the other way around this challenge of where do I park my expensive e-bike that I don't want stolen is you could rely on bike share. It doesn't solve every use case, but that's another alternative is, making sure that bike share is accessible and available throughout a city.
That was another question I had, is like whether cities with really good bike share have as much penetration in terms of personal ownership for e-bikes than, say, like other cities that might not have the bike share networks that, like, say, like a Montreal or a London have.
I don't have the data to validate this, but my hunch is, just based on my time at Lime and just being in this industry a long time, is my hunch is that there's probably more. It's probably, I think in a lot of cases, shared micromobility and bike share is an entryway for a lot of people to say, like you, Jeff, maybe they've never been on an e-bike and they try it and they say, whoa, this is transformational in a city like San Francisco that's very hilly. And then they start using it and it just, assuming they have the storage and the ability to purchase it, they say, yeah, no brainer, I'm going to buy one of my own. So I would guess that it's pretty synergistic, that there are folks who use that, that's the gateway to buying their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I'm going up a hill with my daughter on the back of my bike, I definitely am like, I wish right now I had an e-bike or e-assist.
Yeah, you're hardcore, Jeff.
Yeah, almost too hardcore.
We brought our cargo bike from Davis, where it's very flat, where we would bike our son around. And then when we got to San Francisco, we wimped out. So we got an e-cargo bike.
Yeah. No, I see. I mean, so my street is an old streetcar street, and it's actually the connector from the Mission to Noe Valley. And so I see people coming up and down the street every day with their kids and e-bikes and everything else. So I see it all the time, and I know that it's valuable. I just haven't made the jump yet. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but yeah. I've also seen discussions of like the manufacturing or the building of e-bikes generally and the companies that do that. I'm curious about like these companies like Rivian and car companies that are getting into e-bike production. I imagine there's some probably robust production in Asia and other places where they already have like 2 and 3 wheelers that are pretty ubiquitous. I'm wondering like what the production's like, because I know that we've had companies here like Rad Power Bikes, and even Super Pedestrian went out of business. Where they have the Copenhagen wheel. Van Moof, which had a showroom kind of close to my house, is gone. So I'm curious about that, like the production of new e-bikes and like how that leads into the resale market if some of these bike distributors disappear.
I mean, in fairness, as I understand it, Van Moof is sort of re-emerging from bankruptcy, is my understanding.
It is.
I think Rad Power Bikes is too. I think somebody else.
As is Rad Power. I think Super Pedestrian is completely dissolved at this point, or has been, purchased by others. So I think that maybe is one answer is, in a lot of cases, these companies can emerge, re-emerge, same with some shared scooter companies that went bankrupt. So I think there is that. There's a reason companies can go through bankruptcy and then come back. But I do think we have a pretty robust ecosystem of different manufacturers. And this isn't my area of expertise of research, but my understanding is there's been some challenges in the sort of aftermath of COVID-19. I think you alluded to this, Ysabel, of like, there was a big boom and then there was kind of a bust, and now we're trying to get back out of it. But my understanding is that the e-bike industry is still pretty healthy. But Ysabel, you probably have a better finger on the pulse there.
Yeah, no, agree on that. I think like we definitely saw kind of a U-turn from after COVID, where we saw definitely like more an overstock market, where a lot of manufacturers has been kind of overproducing. And right now, what we see is that kind of the market is in the US getting kind of a U-turn, where we see it's more kind of an undersupplied market. I think also when it comes to manufacturers, like of course, like the tariffs starting to get a play, but like in the end, also like tariffs are here for protecting the domestic manufacturing, but they also, of course, like increase like the cost for these manufacturers. For us at Upway, because we do not manufacture the bike, it's not really an issue. But the market itself, it's turning from more like an oversupply market towards an undersupplied market.
What is the lack of like advertising budgets that are as big as car companies have on, say, the ability of people to understand that e-bikes are out there, or companies like yours are out there? I mean, you all mentioned Carvana and cars.com, and I think about like Auto Trader and others. Like, you see these commercials everywhere, even car companies, they're like ubiquitous. Like that's how they get their visibility. So how can you compete with that if somebody's considering a car versus an e-bike, and maybe they don't know an e-bike might be available to them because the advertising is just overwhelming?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think first of all, car owners could be also like potential e-bike owners, but it can also be that the audience is definitely totally different, because we see people that also own an e-bike are not definitely like owning specifically a car. So I think when it comes to that, like it's not really kind of competitive with each other. I think it's right now, especially in the US, how I see it, like it's a beast of a market. There are so many inhabitants here. Like it's almost as big as Europe, So I think we see it almost like different countries within each other. And we're just trying to bring awareness that e-bikes exist here in the US step by step. So I think when it comes to competing with companies like Carvana, but they also exist already for multiple years in the market here. Whereas at Upway, we just started 3 years ago and we're building up the business. And it's super easy to burn a lot of money here in this country and raise awareness. But in the end, you also wanted to do it in a smart way. So when it comes to being smart, I think you want to be in the market where your current customers are. So for us, for example, that means is we see a strong e-bike adoption on both the East Coast and the West Coast. So that's why we also have our hubs there. Like California is one of our biggest market, and still it has over 50 million inhabitants. So we just try to be really close to our customers where they are currently already are.
I think I'll just add on. I think the challenge is just that its adoption might be a little bit slower without massive advertising budgets to really pump up that awareness. I think one of the things that we actually saw, we asked people in the survey that I ran for this report, are you familiar with Upway? Are you familiar with Carvana, CarMax? Are you familiar with Turn or Rad? And, about 1 in 20 people said that they were familiar with Upway, which frankly, I think Jeff, I hadn't heard of Upway before last year. So I do think there's a bit of a sort of uphill challenge to move that towards where some of those more recognized brands are. But at the same time, the vehicles are kind of their own advertisement, right? E-bikes are still new to most people in the US, and so they're still eye-catching. I drop my kids off at school every day, and just the sort of natural evolution of, first year, there was a couple dads or moms on e-bikes, and now there's dozens dropping off on e-bikes. It might be slower than if we had, the advertising budgets of some of those car companies, but it's happening. It's sort of a natural evolution of people saying, hey, now that there's other people to talk to, there's that sort of natural conversation and adoption.
It might breed a little bit more sustainable growth too, if I'm being honest. There's a limit to, and we live in San Francisco. There's the tech advertising is ridiculous. Right now, and there's an NPR article the other day about how all these AI companies are doing advertisements for themselves and nobody else. And so you have no idea what's going on, even if you're looking at that ad. Yeah. But they also, burn bright, flame out, and then disappear. So, if you're a little bit more thoughtful and sustainable about and a lot of that is advertising spend, right? I imagine. So it seems like the sustainability is actually maybe a more important point. But I thought it was, an interesting thought experiment thinking about the difference between the pummeling of Americans by car company advertisement versus the idea that you can maybe educate a few new people in that way.
Yeah, and maybe one point I want to raise is when we talked earlier about kind of bike sharing, I think we see it kind of also as an organic way of advertising. Definitely bike sharing for us is not competing at all. Bike sharing for us is actually the best entry point to potential owning an e-bike, ownership, it's kind of what comes next. I think we really see it kind of complementing each other. A potential city bike e-bike user might likely to buy probably an e-bike on a later stage because this person see it first, bike sharing as low commitment. They try to use it, they have it kind of occasionally, and then at some point they want to include it in their daily commuting. They see more kind of the cost efficiency because in the end, it all sums up also the bike sharing. They see that the e-bikes are reliable. So we really see it also kind of all the city bike users, especially what I see here in New York, that can potentially own later on also an e-bike by themselves.
I also love your point, Jeff, about sort of being pummeled by car ads. And it makes me think of, I think it's Tom Flood, if you're familiar, his phrase, bikes deliver the freedom that car ads promise. I do think there's a little bit of truth or lack thereof in advertising. E-bikes actually deliver on what everyone says it is, as opposed to having to create false realities of car-free cities where you're the only driver going through. I think they actually deliver on what they say they'll do.
Yeah, you can actually park in front of places where otherwise you wouldn't have. My favorite ad is when they close down like the Bay Bridge or some road in Los Angeles to do a car commercial, and so that the car can be there without any other cars, even though that never happens, right? There's never an fully empty Bay Bridge. So I'm wondering about the momentum for e-bikes, especially given this moment in time where the administration currently has the tariffs, as you mentioned, Ysabel, but there's also like the push against environmental regulations and standards, the trying to get rid of the endangerment finding, those types of things. I'm wondering what the continued movement is forward for this industry, but just sustainable transportation writ large because of that in your minds.
Yeah, I think it starts on a macro level niveau. I think especially when I just realize it for myself, I think again, where we started at the beginning of the topic, it's safety. I think when it comes to bike infrastructure, bike lanes, bike parking, I think this is really important. Secondly, I think it's affordability. I think in general, we're very happy to see that rebate programs are popping up, because I think this helps people also allow purchasing potential e-bikes. And then I think thirdly is within those rebate programs, not in all of the rebate programs, refurbished e-bikes are eligible. So it's only on new e-bikes. But when we talked about the price difference between new e-bikes and refurbished e-bikes, you can still save a lot. So you can almost cover the whole price of a refurbished e-bikes with your rebate program. So I think including certified refurbished e-bikes into the program will help. And I would say these are my kind of three main pillars to increase the e-bike adoption.
Yeah, and I'm very bullish about the future of e-bikes. I think it's been slow. It's had some ups and downs over the last several years. But if we're talking to people like you, Jeff, and you haven't even been on an e-bike, there's just lots of people who have yet to experience it. There's just this huge total addressable market of people who have yet to really give it a try. And I think, the economic sort of argument in terms of affordability, the energy security argument, as we are, at war with Iran and gas prices are, increasing rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of arguments to be made, even absent sort of the broader sort of, funding for sustainable transportation options, things like that. I think there's just a very sort of bottom up groundswell of desire for affordable transportation options. I'll also say, I think over time, as people, have more exposure, their friend buys a bike or they go to the World Cup or the Olympics, and they go to a city where they tried e-bike or an e-scooter, that's another opportunity to get more people exposed and trying these new modes out. So there's definitely headwinds, but I think kind of like with renewable energy, I think a lot of the momentum has already been built, and it's just a matter of, whether that's going to increase really rapidly or maybe at a more steady rate. It's going to continue to grow.
It's funny. My first experience with the shared bike was actually in 2012 in the London Olympics with Boris bikes. And so
there you go.
Going to a different city and trying to get around, you can go through the tube, but you can't get to any map shops that way out in the Netherlands. But here's my last question for you all. What's interesting to you about this moment in time in transportation? And specifically related to e-bikes, but it could be with just kind of how we're moving. And you answered this a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more.
Sure. I guess one of the things that I haven't talked about yet, which is maybe surprising because we're talking about e-bikes entirely in this conversation, is that we haven't really brought up, I think the really big conversation right now around e-bikes is around youth safety. There's a lot of controversy right now about it. A lot of people worried about e-bike safety. We've seen some really bad examples, in my opinion, of bills, for example, in New Jersey, which got rid of the 3-class system, imposed a whole slew of barriers to actually using e-bikes. So on that side, very concerning. On the other side, Oregon just passed what I would say is much more progressive legislation around e-bike safety, really addressing the issue of e-motos, lowering the age limit from 16 to 14 for, I think it was class 1 e-bikes. And so I think what was encouraging about that in particular is, to me, that's a more progressive way of trying to strike the balance of addressing valid safety concerns around overpowered, high-speed e-motos that kids really should not be on. Like, you need a driver's license to be on those, as opposed to getting kids around going 10, 15 miles an hour when they're 14 years old and looking, need that independence, want that independence, and striking a balance between the safety concerns and the really valuable, maybe this is full circle, the valuable experiences you get as a kid being independent on two wheels. So I think this is a really, really important moment. I know bills are being considered in California, many other states. And just on a very personal level, I'm a father of two. I want to encourage my kids to get around safely, independently around San Francisco. And so it feels very relevant to me right now. And so I really hope to see more of the sort of Oregon style type of regulations that really tries to distinguish between the dangers of e-motos, but really uphold the benefits of especially some of the like class 1 e-bikes for youth mobility, which is, again, I think we're seeing some of that in California being advanced as well. So it's a really important moment. I hope we get it right, because we don't want to ban e-bikes, real or de facto bans. We really want to keep encouraging this mode. So I do think it's an important moment.
Yeah, and after recapping, I think like the 3 topics where I would continue kind of to stick on is that I think the 3 things that matters most right now is, first is trust and safety. Again, we talked a lot about it, but I think like battery safety has becoming a real topic, especially me. I'm living in New York, like I see it everywhere, but again, it's not an e-bike problem, it's a quality problem. So I think we need to have like controlled system, and because without kind of this trust, like adoption of bikes and e-bikes won't scale. I think secondly, again, affordability. I think at the same time, like anything that is happening on tariffs and supply chain shifts, prices are going up. So I think this also creates a bit of like tension in the market, in the new market, but also in the used market. And I think e-bikes, and especially like the bikes at Upway, like this is one of the most powerful tools to reduce the cost of living for commuters. Like it actually reduced a lot of costs if you switch from car dependency to e-bikes. And that's, I think, especially like certified refurbished e-bikes or even like subscription that we have available at Upway is becoming critical. And then I think thirdly is infrastructure. I think the interest is really there. We see it in a lot of states, on what Calvin is mentioning, on like Oregon, in SF, in Los Angeles, in New York. But I think we haven't unlocked in all of the states like all the usability of it. So I think like things like secured bike parking, charging stations, and also like having this in all of the cities is super important. And I think like those 3 pillars, safety, affordability, and the infrastructure, will really help us to unlock the growth of the e-bikes.
Awesome. Well, Calvin, where can folks find out more about the report?
You can find it. It's been posted to Upway's website.
I'll put it in the show notes, yeah.
It's the reliability-report as part of the URL. But yeah, would love to have people take a read. We didn't cover all the nitty-gritty of the report, but there's survey data in there. There's data, a lot of analyses based on Upway's sales and repair and sort of defect and return data. So I really hope people give it a read, and we'll reach out if they have any questions.
And Ysabel, where can folks find out more about Upway and maybe getting a new refurbished e-bike?
Yeah, so Jeff, everyone can go to upway.co, so not com, upway.co, or come visit one of our up centers. One is based in Brooklyn and one is based in Redondo Beach in Los Angeles. We're open 6 days a week, also on Saturdays, so people can come by and test e-bikes in person, but can also buy it online.
And Calvin, where can folks find you if you wish to be found?
You can reach me. I'm, again, just started at Toole. You can reach out. My email is cthigpen@tooledesign.com. I, again, lead the new mobility practice there. So if you are working on e-bikes, shared micromobility, please reach out. Would love to work with you.
And Ysabel, where can folks find you if you wish to be found?
People can find me at LinkedIn. So first and last name, it's Dutch. It's Ysabel Hoogeveen.
I'll put it in the notes.
Okay, because otherwise it's a bit hard. And otherwise they can email me, Ysabel@upway.shop, for any interesting question or answer they need.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and published first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this week's show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Find us at patreon.com/TheOverheadWire. And you can sign up for our 16-year-old newsletter at theoverheadwire.com. And you can also listen to our show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.